Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning into our webinar on ePayments and financial inclusion. Special thanks to PayNet for sponsoring this webinar today, and also the speakers for taking the time to share their views with us. Now, e-payments has certainly gone a long way in Malaysia, and sometimes I think we kind of lose sight of how far we've come. I remember just about 6 years ago when e-wallets was first introduced. I remember feeling so amazed that we can finally use QR payments just like they do in China, and it was quite common for e-wallet brands to reach out to us and try to do this cashless challenge, to see if you can survive a week just using e-wallet. Nowadays, it's not really a challenge, but those days it was quite a bit. And if you fast forward to today, a lot of us Malaysians might not even go to some shops and some businesses if they don't have any cashless options available. When we look at the financial inclusion front, we're also not doing too bad as well. We have 96% of our population banked. And Bank Negara has also rolled out last year its 4-year financial inclusion framework. And some of the big focus include really being able to tackle that final frontier, that last 4%, SME access to financing, the protection gap, digital payments, and quite a bit more. So today, to discuss the state of things and to chart the way forward, we are joined by, right on top there, we have Alan Nee, the CEO of TNG Digital. Below Alan, we have YT, who is the CEO of Jernexu. Some of you may be more familiar with the consumer-facing brand, which is Ringgit Plus. We have Wilson Bear below him. Wilson is the president of the Fintech Association of Malaysia. Of course, some of you might also know him as the co-founder of Policy Street. And last but not least, below Wilson, we have Gary Yeo, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at PayNet. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey,
So,
Vincent.
hey. So I think maybe let's start off by kind of just taking a step back and maybe getting a sense of how we are actually doing in financial inclusion in Malaysia. Maybe we'll start with Alan. How do you think Malaysia is doing in this regard?
I think Malaysia is doing actually quite well. As you mentioned, more than 90% adults already have a bank account. I don't think the unbanked segment is very big in Malaysia. But I do think the underbanked, underserved segments, I think still quite big. For a simple reason, for traditional bank, for them to serve certain segments from commercially is not even viable. When you have branches, once you have salespeople, you have certain costs incurred to service customer. If the ticket size is too small, the tenor is too small, the investment is too small, or the SME is too small, the bank chooses not to serve. Purely from commercial perspective. This is where I see the fintech player like us and can really come in to help, because our operating on digital platform, the cost to serve is so much lower. Net can really help with underbanked and underserved segments to be better serviced by really the financial inclusion agenda.
Thanks for that, Alan. And I think that's an important point, right? For any initiative to have a long-lasting, sustainable kind of effect, it needs to be profitable for the private entities that are doing it, so that it's something that they would continue to invest in and continue to pursue. And of course, digital platforms are quite well positioned to do that. YT, any views or any sense that you want to share with our audience today about where we are in terms of financial inclusion? You can also come in from a financial literacy angle, since that's something that you guys do quite a bit of research on.
No, thanks for that, and I 100% agree with Alan. Right, I think where the opportunity is really in the middle. Right, we actually got a very well developed banked and very well evolved banked segment. It's a very small segment of the population that's non-banked, but the really tricky part is that very big segment in the middle that's underbanked. Right, meaning they have access but they don't really use it. And I think one thing which we believe is one of the greatest challenges, or two of the greatest challenges, are trust and financial literacy, right? I think there's a lot of actual financial services that have been made available digitally, right? Providers have made it easier to access. But if the end user doesn't really understand it, or doesn't trust the digital channel yet, I think that's where the challenge and therefore the opportunity is, and that's why we invest so much time and effort into education and into building trust, right? Because that's where we believe the biggest opportunity to solve that problem sits.
Thanks for that input, YT. Let's jump on over to Wilson to give us a sense of what is the view of financial inclusion from the perspective of the association, and maybe also give us a little bit perspective into the insurance side of things, right? Because the protection gap is also one of the major kind of issues that Bank Negara wants to tackle between now to 2026.
Sure. There's this financial inclusion framework that was mentioned by you, Vincent, and released by BNM last year that give us quite a bit of insights in terms of the state of financial inclusion in Malaysia. What is interesting is the shift of adoption in financial technology, financial innovation, e-money, post-COVID, right? For example, today, close to 80% of Malaysian adults use digital payments, and about half of them, 40% of them, did so first time after the COVID pandemic. The adoption of financial technology is definitely increasing. However, there remains challenges and issues in financial inclusion if we were to reflect the current state of the nation, right? If you look at the current economy, we do have the low wage problem. We are going through subsidy rationalizations, and the more underserved segment that was mentioned by Alan may be the segment that is the most impacted. So question is, how could fintech players can come in together with FIs in terms of partnership can really advance more financial inclusion. Just a couple of pointers in terms of insurance. I think a protection gap remains as one challenge. Today, in terms of Malaysian adults, there are only about 42% of Malaysian adults who have at least one life insurance policy if you were to take away the duplications. And even for MSMEs as well, for a lot of SMEs in the exposure draft released by BNM for DITO, I think about 85% of MSMEs and SMEs that are underinsured. And a lot of these MSMEs also have issues in terms of access to financing. There are close to 90 billion ringgit financing gap according to the literature of the World Bank. So I think as a country, as an ecosystem, we have grown, but challenges remain. But I remain very excited because this is where fintech comes to play to really help narrow the gap in terms of financial inclusion.
Thanks for that, Wilson. Certainly, we've come a long way, and it's still a lot of progress to be made as well. Thanks for the input. Moving on to Gary, and I think Wilson spoke a little bit about how e-payments, e-wallets have advanced quite significantly in Malaysia, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have a universal QR, right? Because I think if we at the end of the day had 15 QR codes on the counter, I think honestly I wouldn't be using e-wallets either. So yeah, Gary, walk us through your sense of how well we're doing in financial inclusion today in Malaysia.
Okay. I mean, I think everyone has shared a little bit, and I think everyone has their valid points, and I think you're right that to say that it's the underserved that we probably need to worry a little bit more about. The 4% or 5% is probably the last mile, but we still have a lot of work to do with the underserved. So to me, at least in the PayNet's view, I think we feel that from a platform or technology perspective, actually there are a lot of options out there, right? There's actually plenty of options already available with people like Touch and Go, Policy Street, all of these guys, whether it's investment, savings, insurance, payment. There are many options available. I think our view is perhaps the education part is the one that we need to spend a bit more time on. So that's the area that I'm going to try to focus a little bit more energy on. But of course, through partners, right? I think everyone here on this call, I've already reached out to people like Alan and YT, and how can we collaborate together? Because I think the last mile, to solve the last mile probably isn't to provide 10 more platforms that gives you an option to either invest or insure yourself in. I think it's probably letting them know why is it important for you to have insurance. How do we build trust in the payment ecosystem, on the cashless payment ecosystem? Because by and large, I think we've reached a point where the people that understand and trust it have started using it and are using it in a regular manner. The people that don't use it probably are the ones that fall into either they are not familiar with it or do not trust the system altogether, right? I prefer cash. So I think my take is for us to reach a point of financial inclusion that we are, aiming for will probably require both a combination of having the right platforms out there that make it easy for someone to do so, but also a level of understanding and education and trust. Otherwise, one without the other, I fear may not succeed. That's my
I
sense
think so.
anyway.
I think certainly you're right. Embedded finance in digital platforms like Touch and Go and many more enables a simpler distribution to have people access to certain range of financial services, including insurance as well. Thanks for that, Gary. So I've got a little cheeky question for Alan. So you mentioned earlier that Touch and Go is in a good position to be able to tackle a lot of this financial inclusion challenge, right? And of course, recently we've seen the emergence of digital banks, and the whole mantra is also that they are well positioned to be able to tackle financial inclusion issues. Do you think an e-wallet like Touch and Go is in a better position to tackle these issues, or digital banks are in a better position to tackle some of these societal issues?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. I think the digital banks in the early stage, a lot of their products are still, I think, yet to be rolled out to the market. But from my perspective, I do think traditional bank, digital bank, e-wallet platform like us are complementary to each other. Malaysia is already a well-banked society. So a lot of big customer, corporate, even big SME has been already well served. But because of commercial viability, we traditional bank does not want to enter the smaller segments. This is where we can significantly lower the entry barrier. For example, our investment products starting from 10 ringgit, lending products starting from 100 ringgit and as low as 1 week, and insurance starting from 1 ringgit, right? So these are the level of low ticket size bank will never enter. Digital bank is also very interesting, I think, because digital distribution platform, they also can do the same. They can also go into the same segments like e-wallet is serving. But there's also one very big difference I feel between digital bank and e-wallet. Digital bank by themselves is a bank. So chances are they're going to only push the product produced and manufactured by themselves. So it's more of kind of self-sufficient ecosystem. But for e-wallet, we're basically open platform. We're working with anyone. So even looking at all the products we launched by Touch and Go e-wallet, is actually collaboration with various financial institutions. So that gives us a capability of working with the best in each category, which personally I kind of like it because I always like an open platform. But I think it's hard to say. It's like Android and Apple, which one's better, right? So it's really different people's different perspective. So I really think everyone has their place to play.
Thanks, Alan. But if you ask me, Android and Apple, I have a very clear opinion on which is better, but that's not the topic for today. But thanks for sharing your view. Before we move on to the other panelists, maybe I'll just quickly ask you as well, and then I'll ask the rest the same question as well. Walk us through some of the recent things and, historically what Touch and Go has done to actually further the whole financial inclusion goal. And I know recently you've also done a very great initiative with UNHCR to, bring kind of digital payments and e-wallet services to some of the refugees. Maybe you can talk to us about that and your whole history of like being able to move the needle in financial inclusion.
Probably 2-3 things. I think Touch and Go Digital is one of the company launching a lot of products, and we're quite innovative. There's 2-3 things I think we try to make a difference. Number one is really lower the entry barrier, which, as I mentioned previously. Number two is simple UI UX. I think we have to accept every user has different education background, knowledge about financial service products, etc. It's up to us. How can we make this process as painless as it can be, as simple as can be, to get people understand quickly and even try? I think UI UX make a huge difference. That's number 2, right? Number 3 is there are certain segments most of banks actually don't even want to serve. For example, foreigner segments. We have a few million foreigners in Malaysia, working in Malaysia. And even the refugee community, we have more than 200,000 refugees in Malaysia. It is commercially not even viable for the bank to service them. So they are kind of avoided by the traditional bank. But we really open our arm. We even can do payroll services for foreigners right now, right? We also just signed this MOU with UNHCR. We're gonna bring these refugees also into our ecosystem, so they can be eKYC, they can enjoy the full service. So this is something I think we can make a difference.
Very good, and I'm particularly happy to see that UNHCR kind of initiative. So congratulations and well done on that. Moving along to YT, what has Ringgit Plus as an organization done to further financial inclusion in Malaysia?
No, thanks for that. So I think the first thing we did was, I think, very very similar to what Alan was talking about when it comes to the way we think about it is enabling access, right? When I started Ringgit Plus in kind of 2012, there was just no digital access to financial services, right? So that was the first thing we did, and the way that's evolved to today is that we launched the first WhatsApp powered application for financial products. And one of the reasons why we did that was because everybody in Malaysia uses WhatsApp, right? So we felt that it was just the easiest way to enable users to very conveniently get access to apply for or buy financial products anytime, anywhere. The second thing I think which we're very proud of is once you solve the access to financial products, particularly for credit products, then the next problem you have is approvability. And I think it's still a big problem today. How do you credit score and enable banks and non-banks to lend to the underbanked population? So what we did was over the last couple of years, we've worked very closely with Experian to build our own credit score, and we're now working with banks in Malaysia to actually use that credit score, right, to lend to segments of the population who previously could not get access to credit. And then, last but not least, it's going back to my first point, it's really been about enabling access to financial education. Right, every year we run our Ringgit Plus financial literacy survey, right, and increasingly we work with other financial institutions, other great brands in the market to create and curate more financial literacy, more financial education content, and to make that available to anybody. Right, so we don't, it's free content. We invest into that heavily, right, and we really just want to make sure that we help more Malaysians, better understand their financial products.
And that report is something that we look forward to every year to give us a sense of where we are in terms of financial literacy in Malaysia as well. So thanks for producing such a wonderful report. Moving on to Wilson. Wilson, maybe you can give us a sense, from the industry perspective, right? Because I think earlier, a decade ago, when fintech was first coming into the mainstream, one of the big promises of fintech was to really be able to serve the underserved, drive financial inclusion. 10 years have passed since. Have we really moved the needle? What have we done? What can we do more? And of course, to also ask you a question with your other hat, what has Policy Street done to kind of reduce the protection gap in Malaysia, right? So it's a two-part question. Wilson, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. I think what is interesting when it comes to fintech is that now we can claim that, look, we have at least a 10-year journey to talk about. I think most, if not all of us here, we have been in the fintech ecosystem for many years, right? Of course, fintech is nothing new. Financial technology is nothing new. When the first ATM was invented, it was deemed as fintech. But of course, the buzzword fintech was made popular about 10 years back. What I can say from the industry perspective in the past 10 years is that fintech has definitely grown. It has reached a tipping point where there's less skepticism whether fintech can provide value or not. In fact, the general adoption by the masses is the clearest answer to whether fintech can truly add strategic value to the whole financial ecosystem. I think what is interesting is that in the past many years, we have seen different fintech verticals, namely from payment, which is the largest vertical, and rightly so, because payment is an infrastructure for all fintech innovations, to digital assets, to digital banking, digital insurance, remittances, um, alternative financing. I think all these verticals have been contributing values to different segments. Case in point, the RMO players who are in the equity crowdfunding or peer-to-peer segments, they have helped tens of thousands of small businesses to raise fund, whether it's via debt or equity. And all of this data has also been shown and publicized on an annual basis during the SC report or my CF annual report. And and I myself, as a fintech operator, Policy Street, we also get benefited as an ECF issuer as well, right? And that would not be possible for case in point where, uh, before the advent of the ECF framework, it will be difficult to go to the public to raise fund from individuals. So this is the evolutions of the past 10 years. I think what is interesting remains on how fintech players can come together to move to the next step. And I think this hinges on four key factors, namely strategic collaborations. I'm a big believer of strategic collaborations between fintech players and FIs, and of course, including national facilitating institution like PayNet. Number two is about how the data sharing, the entire data infrastructure can come to play, because after all, with insights on data, more financial innovation can be developed and created. And third is a more robust regulatory environment, which I can say that in reflecting in the past 10 years, our regulators have definitely, moved to be more open, right? And last but not least, the infrastructure, whether it's the basic internet access, whether physical infrastructure. I think these four key part will be important to ensure that financial inclusions can be further enhanced.
Definitely some really valid points brought up there. And on the note of ECF, it's not just to enable the SMEs to be able to access financing that they otherwise wouldn't be able to, but it's also for the investor side of things, right? And personally, I enjoy the fact that I now have the opportunity as a journalist in this space to really invest small sums of money in fintechs that raise there that I think have good potential, right? And I think previously this is an opportunity that's reserved for a few select private investors. So it's great to really be able to democratize that to most people. Thanks for that, Wilson. Moving on to Gary, and of course, PayNet has done a lot in this space as well. From I think one of your most memorable one for me was the cashless village in Sekinchan, because the food there is really good. And also recently you've done some partnership to enable scholarship with Kazana. So walk us through all your initiatives, give us a sense of what PayNet has done to further financial inclusion in Malaysia.
Oh, okay. This could take a while if I ran through everything, so I'll try and see how I can keep it brief. So basically, PayNet is by and large, you can look at it as a B2B kind of an organization, right? We typically are not front facing, so a lot of the initiatives that we do, either from a platform level or from through partners, right? So I think again, we are already working very closely with examples of Sekinchan was done with Hong Leong Bank, but we did a similar version, and we continue to do other things with Touch and Go. We're happy to, and we do it with other banks as well. So those are things that we are always working on. I think at any point in time, we have maybe 3 or 4 areas that we focus on together with various banks to push this agenda. We also have various projects going on with schools. So we have two divisions here. We have one division that focuses on institutions of higher learning, like government universities, things like that. And then we have another bunch of people that work primarily with banks to drive cashless schools, but on a primary, secondary school level. Another thing that we are doing, maybe from a platform level that might be interesting to the public, is we are assisting Bank Negara with scams. Again, as I mentioned, to us, we feel that one of the blockers or things that are holding people back could be the fear of the unknown and of scams, because every day in the newspaper, you open a newspaper, it's like a 99% chance there is an article about a scam. So PayNet is heavily involved in the National Scam Response Center, and we have now started the project to look at whether we can use AI to help us further the battle against scams, because I think it's just a matter of time before scammers use AI to try to elicit more money from unsuspecting people. So I think PayNet is trying to figure out how do we help combat this, right? How do we move from recovery to prevention? So this is a big one for us. The other thing that maybe of note that I think either Wilson or YT also mentioned was data. I think PayNet is starting to explore what can we do with what we feel is not our data, but the data of the people that are using our platform. How can we use this to further good? Which at the moment, the project that you all may have heard of is the ACS, the Alternative Credit Scoring Project that we are looking at. But the bigger and broader one would be the open banking project that we have embarked on with Bank Negara. So we have a roadmap that ideally by the end of next year, perhaps early.
I think we may have lost Gary for a bit there. Maybe we'll move on to some audience question while we wait for Gary to be able to dial back in. We do have one question here from Ruben. It's directed at Alan, but anyone from the panel is also welcome to add their input as well. So Ruben's talking about trust, and I think that's something that Wilson mentioned earlier as well, right? It's a key theme. How do you build trust to foster adoption? And I think it's evolved quite a bit, because I think 10 years ago, one of the key concerns with trust is whether the fintech will even be there next month or not. So maybe we'll pass it over to Alan, and then if anyone wants to chime in, they're welcome to chime in as well. Alan, any input on the building trust?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Also, Gary mentioned a few things about how to fight scam, how to build trust. Trust, to a large extent, is both hardware and software. What I mean is hardware is always infrastructure behind it to support. Software is about perception. I personally find out maybe the software is even harder than the hardware. If you're looking at a hard infrastructure, actually Bank Negara has done a lot of things. In terms of new anti-fraud measurements, which introduced June 2023, which we have seen since introduction of these new measurements about binding your device to your account, also using face recognition rather than just SMS, the fraud incidence has reduced more than 90%. So that is really a good thing. Another thing is a perception. People still get very scared because they still see the news happen from time to time on newspaper. Despite right now, we're looking at these incidents, a lot of incidents is actually people are transferring money out by themselves. They actually approve these transactions on their own device, and even they're using their own face to authorize this transaction. So that comes to the second one, really education. How can we get people to really understand these different schemes, scam schemes on the internet, on the social media, etc., how do they avoid getting into these traps? As education play a very big part. When it comes to the e-wallet industry, maybe there's one simple fact many people don't really even know, and that is also shows the weakness of education. People could ask this question. There are 50 e-wallets, some big, some small. How comfortable I should be by putting money there if tomorrow some wallet just closed door, is my money gone, right? Many people could have this question. But reality is people actually don't know your money technically is not even with e-wallet. Bannigar, when they set up this whole e-wallet industry, there is a very particular requirements. The money from the customer has to be set aside with a trustee account. The e-wallet not allowed to touch your money unless it is for merchant settlement, which the money you spend, right? So even the e-wallet close the door, your money will still be there, will refund to you. That's precise reason why we have seen a few small e-wallet retreat from the market, but we have not seen any outcry from the public. The money has been returned in order because of that. But how many people actually understand this? I'll probably bet 99% of people have no idea this is a mechanism. So I think it really comes to a stage just doing the infrastructure, the regulation, policy are not sufficient. The education, the software, always, that part need to be really strengthened to get a message across.
Yeah, I suppose a good regulatory framework and good conduct from the players are very crucial to enabling this kind of trust, right? Thanks for that, Alan. Let's jump back to Gary, and I think Gary, you were talking a little bit about a few things, right? And I do have follow-ups on that as well, and some of the audience also wants to know a little bit more about the initiative you're talking about. You were talking about your alternative credit scoring. You were talking about your open banking. Are you at a stage where you are able to share with the public what this projects are and what can we expect from them, and in relation to how that also helps to further drive financial inclusion in Malaysia?
Okay, so maybe we'll start with alternative credit scoring is still in its early days. So I think basically what we are trying to do is understanding what exactly can or how useful is any data that we have towards helping either a company or an individual obtain a loan that they would not have previously been able to obtain. So either we help you obtain a loan that you would not have gotten, or we help you get a higher amount because actually with the additional information from us, a lender can make a call and say, hey, I think we can lend this guy a little bit more money. So again, it's early days because while we do have a bunch of data, we need to make sure that this is useful data, this is the right data. We also need to find a lender. Most likely, we are thinking it could be someone like a fintech, maybe a digibank that has a slightly higher risk appetite. Because while we may be able to come up with some kind of a data set that might be useful to somebody has to agree that this data is, this is to a point where they're willing to lend some money, right? So I think there's still that part of the journey that we've not gone down. And then but this is a prelude to open banking, right? So one day when we have open banking, in theory, most of this information should be easily accessible by fintechs, banks, and easily shareable by consumers, right? So we strongly believe that all of this information belongs to you as a consumer, and you should have the ability to make a decision how this data is used to benefit yourself. And that is the premise that we are working on for open banking. The big use cases that we hope to solve, at least in the early days, could be simple stuff like opening an account. So traditionally now it may not be as easy to open an account, but with open banking, perhaps it could be a 2-second process. It may not even require you taking pictures of various documents and stuff like that. It could be facilitation of loans similar to ACS. Alternative credit scoring, like I said, is a prelude to this. But imagine if we could pull all the data that we have out there together, it's going to be even better. And I think the last one probably may not be as obvious to consumers, but again, going back to the scam and fraud, if we are able to see more of what is happening in the whole ecosystem, because even PayNet does not see everything. I think there is a better chance of us building an algorithm or using AI to prevent fraud. So I think those are at least some of the big items that we're hoping open banking will help the people of Malaysia. And I think it's a recurring theme, right? Everyone, I believe, understands that without education, without trust, it's much harder to get to where we want to be. And all of these things are a way of getting us to that point in time, I think.
Certainly, and earlier you mentioned about how the industry needs to use AI because the scammers are also using AI as well. I mean, it's quite terrifying, right? Because we're seeing all this Gen AI videos of Lee Hsien Loong, Elon Musk peddling certain investments, saying it's great, and it's for those who are maybe not familiar, it's very easy to think that these reputable people are pushing this. So certainly, it's something that I should spend all my retirement funds on. So I think a lot to be done on that front as well. So on a related note, I think today we spoke a little bit and actually quite a bit about financial literacy. I just want to maybe direct a question to YT as well, since again, that's a space that you guys operate in. What can we do to elevate financial literacy in Malaysia? Is enough being done? What else can be done?
I think that you can always do more. So I mean, I'll throw out some really left field ideas which we've not just discussed but even tried to execute on, but are quite challenging, right? So one idea is, why don't you teach it? Why don't you teach it in schools or universities? Basic financial literacy about like the real basics of how does credit work, right? Why is insurance important? Why is investment important, right? I think that there's a comment in the chat, right, which is like, well, there's what can 4 companies and 50 e-wallets do, right? And he's right. It's really tough for any one company to do it. So that's why one of our, again, left field idea was the one way which at least you can reach everybody at least once in their lives, right, is through formal education. It doesn't need to take a lot of time. Other things which we've tried ourselves, but it's a little bit challenging, is to try and do it through the workplace. I think if it's, there are some companies that want to do it, and we've tried to offer those sorts of services, essentially providing basic financial planning education. But I think that's tricky, right? Because in any kind of work situation, the time is limited. And time is limited, and taking time off for training is always challenging. So I think the real left field idea would be to make it part of a curriculum. I think we did partner with a university or two to try that, but it's always challenging to get people's time.
For sure, and I think I see a lot of banks and also fintechs. They start rolling out these products for children, right? And then you start enabling them to visualize their budget, the setting. Also help parents to manage, teach the kids about managing the finances as well. So I think a lot of this bits and pieces come together to actually be able to help further that goal a little bit. I guess my next question would be thinking back about the 4% that we spoke about earlier, right? Now we are again, doing reasonably well, but 4% of a 33 million, 34 million is not a small sum of people. It's a sizable sum of people that still do not have access to financial services. So maybe we'll start with Wilson from the view of the association on what can be done to really plug that pesky 4% that we can't seem to plug at the moment.
I think what is important is to be able to understand this segment, who is this 4%, and very importantly, why are they included in this wave of e-payment or digital finance. What I've realized is that a lot of fintech players today, they are mainly concentrated in the more urbanized areas, and the segments that most of these players are serving naturally start from the segments they are most familiar with. And to me, in order to really advance financial inclusion, is really to be able to understand this particular segment, whether is it due to trust issue, whether is it due to infrastructure that I mentioned, due to the lack of access to even basic internet. I understand that there are still areas in certain pockets of this country, they still have issues in terms of accessing to internet. And I think without internet, one would be very much disconnected to digital finance. Question would be, who are the right stakeholders tasked to resolve these issues? So this is where I think will be very important, and the fintech solutions could be introduced to really help bridge the gap, whether it's the 4% who is not yet banked actively, or the 50% of the larger population who is uninsured or underinsured. If I may to chime in on the protection gap, because it's also linked back to the underserved segment in terms of building trust. My personal experience through Policy Street, when it comes to insurance, is really about giving the right experience to this segment. For example, today we are insuring more than 300,000 gig workers, Foodpanda riders, Grab drivers, Shopee food riders, blue collar workers. To them, a lot of time, financial products, especially insurance, right? It is intangible. It is just a piece of legally binding document which many of them do not understand. But what we have learned over the years is that when they get to experience claim, right? When they see that they actually get benefited from financial product, this is where the paradigm shift takes place. And I noticed that a lot of these underserved segments, the gig workers, they also go with this tribe mentality. If we can identify who are the community leaders, they are the influencers, right? And the rest would then follow to see that, look, this fintech solution is true, it helps, and we should all experience them. And hopefully this could be one of the ways to help the more marginalized segment, whether it's a 4% or the other underserved segments, to be financially included.
Mm. And certainly we've seen examples of internet being a barrier to some of these financial inclusion initiatives, and we see, even the Philippines, some banks are starting to deploy Starlink into certain areas to enable that kind of access, right? So, I think that's also something maybe we could potentially consider, because Starlink is also somewhat available in Malaysia as well. But there are other perspectives and other methods to look at as well. Gary, any views on what we can do to close that last 4% gap?
Yeah, okay. I think it's a broader conversation, right? Like some people used to say, "Hey, how do I sign up the merchant in the middle of some rural area, 2 hours from the city center?" And I used to say, maybe while it's important, maybe we need to worry about the guy that's in the city center that's still not using cashless or not promoting it heavily, right? So I think while it is important to look at 4%, we shouldn't lose sight of the other people that are not basically pushing it as much as we think, or using as much as we think they should. So I saw a comment in the chat, and I think it's aligned with something that I was thinking of saying, which is we hear bits and pieces, right? Everyone's doing little things here and there, and they're trying to bridge this gap, which is by and large the whole agenda about how do we get either it's education or trust. But I think for us to really do it, while we can speak about it as a general principle that this is required, I think the execution is important, right? So I think the execution is where we need to come together. It's unlikely we can do it without Bank Negara. So I think we need to come together with Bank Negara, maybe other government institutions, and really have a plan, right? So that I kind of pitched this once a long time ago and said, hey, let's identify all the various problem statements, and then let's say, okay, then who should be focused on this? Rather than we have a problem statement, then everybody goes out and tries to do it in their own way, manner or form. I don't know whether there's a way to do it where there's some, let's say it's a connectivity. Then who do we work with, and how do we do it in a concerted way? How do we do it in a structured way? Where do we start for connectivity? Whereas, because I've been here for a while, and we hear this a lot, right? Everyone talks about network connection, access to it. I don't know whether we'll ever solve the problem if we just keep hoping that organically connectivity will arrive. Like maybe Starlink is an example, but somebody has to do it, right? Somebody has to sit down and say, let's do Starlink, and Starlink which area, who's gonna fund it, whatever it is, right? And then I think even for things like literacy, rather than 5 people sharing, what is the concerted message? A common message, right? Like everyone sees the common message, so that when we build trust, it's like as an industry, we're building we're sharing the same message. We're using the right platforms to share the message. So I think that's at least my sense of how we can accelerate reach beyond not just the 4%, but even the underserved. Is most likely, again, not to develop more platforms, not to develop more solutions, but maybe how can we work together in a coordinated manner to address this, right? That's my sense, and hopefully PayNet can be a part of that. Since we are agnostic and we are neutral, we could potentially pull everyone together.
I think fragmented initiatives is a perennial problem that we deal with in Malaysia across all sectors, but certainly something that should and can be addressed. Alan, YT, anything to add to that particular question? Alan?
Yeah,
Yes, go ahead.
sometimes I'm even thinking, for these 4% people, do we really understand enough? Is it access to financial services is most pressing issue for them? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? If they are living in very remote area, maybe it's cash is sufficient for them. And maybe the clean water, stable electricity is more important than access to loans. So I think just looking at 4% as a number to say we need to move from 96 to 100%, maybe not enough. We need to dig deeper into with 4% to really understand what is most pressing issue for them and helping them with that first.
I think certainly that's a good perspective to zoom out from just the financial angle and then look at their needs holistically on what they need. Yeah, good point brought up over there, Alan. The other question I guess I have, we've progressed a lot in ePayments, and it's something we spoke about throughout the hour as well. We've gone from only having a limited number of stores with cashless to these days, I'm actually starting to see a number of stores. I think at least once a week I'll come across a store that says only cashless payments. And maybe I wanted to get a sense from the panelists on whether or not that's cause for concern. Should we pull the brakes a little bit? Because some countries, like even Australia, they're trying to introduce laws to ban this kind of thing where it's purely just cashless. Like, where do we stand on this issue? Maybe we can have the payments folks talk about this first. We'll get Gary and then Alan to comment, and then maybe Wilson and YT to add, if anything.
Okay, our sense is this is not something that we promote, right? I mean, we do not go out and encourage either acquirers or merchants to only accept cashless. I think that we can start with that as a fundamental basis of our thinking. I think choice is always important. And at some point when the time is right, maybe it should be just as such, right? But at the moment, I truly feel that choice is important. But it's a reflection of the efforts that we have made, and it's a affirmation that cashless does bring its merits, right? So in my past life, when I was pushing QR payments, it was very difficult to get people to understand the value of going cashless via QR, and it took a lot of time and effort. But this, to me, is a confirmation that people have started seeing it either from a reconciliation perspective, effort required, closing, pilferage, whatever it is, right? I think they've started seeing it. But we would probably like to see consumers being given a choice. I would rather merchants work with people like us or acquirers to incentivize people to go cashless rather than force feed them to go cashless, like extra topping or pearls if you use cashless for your bubble tea or whatever it is, right? Or 5% discount. I think I'd rather people go down that path, because that was always our path. How do we encourage people to go cashless? Forcing them was not at any point in time on our agenda.
Thanks for that, Gary. And Alan, any views on this emerging trend?
Yeah, although I'm from the e-payment industry, but my personal view is still customer deserve all options. In some country, actually not accepting cash is actually against the law. So you just cannot not accepting cash, because this is by your government, your authority, right? As a merchant, you have to accept cash. If let's say there's no such law in Malaysia, maybe many merchants doing this purely because commercial reasons. Many people actually don't even know cash is actually the most expensive payment method. The fake bills, you have to every day deposit cash back to the bank, coming back and forth the time you spend, etc. Is actually make cash is actually quite expensive for some merchants. Some merchants may be doing it purely from commercial perspective. But if let's say there's no such law forbidding this, and people also doing this because for their own benefits, it is a little bit hard because I guess Reese merchant has already calculated the pros and cons, right? By chasing away some of the customer insisted using cash versus the cost incur. Maybe they have done their own calculation and realized this is most beneficial for them. So I think this is become, the merchant personal interest versus whatever is for the bigger good. This become tough. So I do believe I think regulation probably play a role here.
Thank you for that, Alan. And Wilson, Whitey, anything to add to that question? Wilson? No, okay. Let's spend some time to take a little bit of questions from the audience, and then we can move on to some closing thoughts. We have a question here from Leona. How do you see cross-border e-payments evolving, and what impact do you see this having on financial inclusion globally? I suppose that's a question that's more for PayNet as well. Gary, any views on that?
How do we see it evolving? Okay, I think there are two ways of looking at it, right? I mean, right now, PayNet is embarking on bilateral arrangements with various parties. And we've already enabled Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, inbound from China. And through our relationship and partnership with Alipay International, we also have 10 other countries that can now come into Malaysia and scan and pay on our shores through our Do It Now QR. So I think it's a nice start, right? I think this, if over time more merchants come to learn about this and are aware of this, they will see. Hopefully, this is another element that will bring them around to accepting Do It Now QR payments. Because now, hey, now I have access to 10 million more tourists that are coming into Malaysia, something along those lines, right? I think the second part of it is the broader perspective is what Bank Negara is working on, which I think most of people in the market would be familiar with Nexus. And I think Nexus would be the central hub where in the future, be it payments or remittance, it should allow for more seamless connections for all the countries to get together and interact with each other. Right now, it is a bit of a difficult proposition, even for PayNet, because each country is quite a challenge. So we have others that we are talking to, Cambodia, we have Vietnam, we have Nepal, India, Sri Lanka. There are many countries that are talking to us for both cross-border payments and cross-border P2P remittance. But yeah, I mean, as maybe the second part of the question is impact. I think impact-wise, I don't know about the financial impact, but we started this journey because we wanted Malaysians to have the ability to enjoy the same kind of convenience if they're already familiar with it. For example, I already know how to scan and pay in Malaysia. Why can't I scan and pay the same way and use the same platform that I use in Singapore or in Thailand? So I think from a financial inclusion standpoint, maybe that is closer to what we're talking about, which is both allowing for inbound to come in and for our people to enjoy what they already enjoy here around the world, and we continue to expand to more and more corridors.
Sure, and I suppose beyond just tourists, business is so global these days, right? And doing so many of this e-commerce and businesses globally, being able to pay your vendors, being able to receive payments cross-border in a fast, transparent, and cost-efficient way, is also, I believe, a form of financial inclusion as well. I'm going to try to take one more last question, and then maybe we can move on to closing thoughts. Um, Sorry, Eugene, I'm not very clear on your question still. I don't think we're able to take the question. I guess let's just move on to closing thoughts. We'll start with Wilson, YT, Alan, and then back to Gary. Wilson, any thoughts on where we can where do we go from here, and what do you see?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's interesting conversation from all parties, right?
Mm,
What is quite
mm,
clear is that number one, financial innovation is becoming a norm. The adoptions of digital finance is also a norm. Question is how do we segment times those populations and market who are still left behind in the pursuits of financial inclusion? So that's number one. Number two, I think the definition of financial inclusion also has to be made clear, right? If we were to put into the context of an individual, the financial inclusion journey goes in a way from accumulating wealth, saving, investment, and also protection, right? And this means different things to different people, right? To a working class in KL, Penang, and JB, to a gig worker in Sabah, right? So we need to be able to be very clear in terms of what does financial inclusion mean for different people, and perhaps this is where different fintech players can come to play as well with their different expertise and domain knowledge. And last but not least, I think what is, I believe, is a consent among the panel here is increasing collaborations among all parties, whether it's with FI, whether it's among different fintech players, and we have PayNet here as the national payment infrastructure, as perhaps the unified party for different players to come in to really advance financial inclusion in a more effective manner. So these are the 3 points that I would like to share.
wonderful. And YT, any closing thoughts for us?
Maybe just two things that kind of stayed on my mind through this conversation. The first one is, we've talked a lot about financial education, but in my experience, that's like trying to boil the ocean, right? There's immediately right at the top of that, at least what we do is we try and split it into just understanding the product and then building trust, right? There's a huge difference between, do I know what this insurance product is to do I trust the person providing the insurance? And those are two very different challenges that need to be addressed separately. And then secondly, let's go back to the last question that was asked about financial inclusion and ePayments. It just kind of triggered a thought that that's a really cool example of how innovation has helped to drive financial inclusion, right? Because prior to more cost-effective and more easily available cross-border payments, the huge segments of the population in Malaysia, and I'm sure all over the world, right, remain in cash when it came to managing their money. And when they sent it home, it was extremely expensive, right? Massive cost. But with more and more players like Touch and Go providing such easy access to international remittance, that's not just easy access, but much cheaper. That drives more people, that segment of the population into, to become maybe not banked, but close to being banked, right? And then they then get access to more, through that ecosystem, they get access to other financial services. So I think that's a really cool example of how innovation in one part of the value chain can really drive broader financial inclusion.
Certainly, I think digital payment platforms like TNG can be a gateway to a lot of a full gamut of financial services as well. Thanks for that input, YT. Alan, any closing thoughts for our audience today?
Yeah, as I mentioned in many different occasions, the openness of the platform and also partnership has always been the principle we believe in. In TNG Digital, we try to work with all different partners, be it traditional bank, digital bank, national switch like PayNet, even regulator like Bank Negara, Security Commission. We always would like to partner and work collectively to achieve the financial inclusion agenda. And I personally believe that's only what works. Any company has limited resources and strengths, but we come together can make a big difference.
Thank you, Alan. Finally, Gary, closing thoughts for us today.
Okay, closing thoughts. Okay, maybe I won't harp on the same things that I've already mentioned earlier, but maybe the closing thought could be similar to. I think there's another thing that resonates within this community is that how can maybe somebody help pull people together. And I think PayNet, maybe my closing thought would be, start looking at PayNet as possibly one of these guys that can help, right? I think those of you that have been in the industry for a while, maybe 2 years ago, I don't think there will be a discussion between fintech and PayNet. Very less likely, right? I mean, Vincent, you yourself have been in this game for a while. I think
Yes.
with when Farhan came in and
Yeah.
a little bit of my influence as well, I think we started trying. We've recognized or we have made it clear that we think any big, real innovative change probably will come from the fintechs, and we're happy to be part of that journey, right? So my closing statement would be, hey, look at PayNet and don't think of us as a regulator. Don't think of us as someone, but maybe look at us as more as a collaborator. We're happy if you can reach out to us. We would like to, as I mentioned earlier, most of the things that we would like to do, aside from a platform basis, will probably be through a partner like Policy Street, Touch and Go, Ringgit Plus. So, but the more of you guys that come out and reach out to PayNet, we will be happy to see how we can continue this journey together, accelerate whatever that you're trying to do with PayNet's resources and reach. So yeah, that's
All right. Wonderful. And with that, that only leaves me to thank over 300 of you, actually nearly like more than 300 of you across LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube tuning in live with us today, and my fellow panelists for sharing their views. Thank you and goodbye.